Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our program, Was Columbus Jewish and Should We Care? With author-speaker Norma Libbon. I'm Linda Goff, and I'm the president of the New Mexico Jewish Historical Society, and I live here in Santa Fe. We are delighted to have everyone here today, and our participants span the East Coast, West Coast, Mountain States. Some of you tuning in this morning are from Connecticut, New Jersey, California, Maryland, Illinois, Colorado, Texas, and throughout the state here in New Mexico. So to our members and friends, thank you for joining us. And for those of you for whom this is your first opportunity to participate in one of our programs, we also welcome you. We had about 75 people sign up for today's program, and we hope that the majority of them will be able to join us. If you're not familiar with New Mexico Jewish Historical Society, you can check out our website at www.nmjhs.org. I'll send an email to everyone afterwards thanking you for joining us today. A couple of quick announcements before we get started. We will soon be announcing our virtual fall program, which will be October 24th and 25th. We had hoped to be able to have our usual in-person conference in Las Cruces, New Mexico, but obviously that wasn't going to happen. The theme of this year's virtual program, different from what we had originally planned, is Jewish Life and Beyond, a mosaic of stories. And it will be on the afternoons of the 24th and 25th of October, so please do stay tuned. One other program I'd like to mention, and again, more information will be forthcoming, will be another individual standalone program like this morning. And that will be September 23rd at 5 p.m. And the title of that is From Hitler to Hollywood, Moguls, Movies, and the Plot Against America, which will be presented by our very own Marcia Torben, who lives also here in Santa Fe, is a member of our board and director of the Santa Fe Jewish Film Festival. Thank you very much, Marcia. I'll turn it over to Marcia, who will in turn introduce Norma, our speaker, and please take it away, Marcia.
Thank you, Linda. And it's my pleasure to introduce Norma Libbon. Norma is an educator and journalist who has published more than 500 articles in newspapers nationwide and has written 3 award-winning books. She has been collecting women's stories for decades and has been researching crypto-Jewish history in the American Southwest for more than 25 years. That study led her to her research on Columbus. Norma is a longtime member of the New Mexico Jewish Historical Society and has served on the board. Norma, take it away.
Thank you, Marcia. And it's nice to see lots of old friends and new friends. Welcome, everybody, and thank you for tuning in. I guess that's an accurate term, I'm not sure. We're going to talk about Christopher Columbus, who is a very interesting man for a lot of reasons, even though there is an awful lot we don't know about him. He is, I like to say he's one of several, but especially 2 of my favorites, mystery men of history. The other one is Shakespeare, and he's a mystery man by accident. We're not going to go into that. Columbus is a mystery man on purpose. He deliberately told different stories about his life to different people. And that's one of the reasons why it's very hard to track down whether or not he was Jewish. Can I stop and ask if I have the right screen on here? Are you seeing me large? Okay, very good.
Norma, can I interrupt you for just one moment? Because I think there was one thing we failed to mention, and that is if folks have questions, to please take advantage of the chat function. It's at the bottom of your screen. Just click on that. You can type in your question. We're going to be doing this through chat, and you can type in your question at any time or after Norma finishes speaking, but we'd appreciate it if you would do that for us. Thank you. And Norma, please continue.
Right. Thank you, Marcia. You're right. Okay, so we know a lot about Columbus. It's not a secret life, but certain parts of his life are secret. And I'm not going to be able to tell you if he was Jewish or not. I'm sorry. Don't leave, though. But I will be able to tell you what it looks like the situation is. So before we talk about him specifically, I want to put him in the context of the times in which he lived. Most of you probably know that this was the height of the Inquisition, not all of it, but the height of it, 1492. And you all know that that's when he sailed the ocean blue. You might not know that the date of the Inquisition, the date of the termination, expulsion, when everybody had to be out, was originally March 31st, 1492, and then was extended to August 2nd, 1492. And that's the date Columbus sailed. Not just 1492, but the exact same day, August 2nd, 1492. That may be the very thing that raised the question in the first place. But there are lots of other things. So first of all, just so that you have a picture of what the culture was like at that time, on the Iberian Peninsula, which is the correct way to call it until 1492, in the year 1000, there were approximately, and all population numbers are approximate, 1 million Christians, 1 million Muslims, and 1 million Jews. It was pretty evenly divided. This is the year 1000. By 1492, there were, depending on which historian you look at, anywhere between 150 and 250,000 Jews left in what was at that point now Spain. Portugal has different numbers. There were Jews there too. So what does that tell us? 3/4 of the Jews were gone for one reason or another. Some died, some got converted, many were murdered, but a lot of them, a real lot of them left and went all over. They went to Turkey, they went to Greece, they went to Italy, France, England, all the way up to Scotland and Ireland, in fact. They went into Russia and Poland. They went everywhere, and they went, depending on when they went, they might have gone as Jews, they might have gone as secret Jews, they may have converted to Christianity and gone, depended where they were going. And frequently when they got to where they were a generation or two later, where they may have been welcomed, now they weren't, and they had to leave again, hence the wandering Jew. So that was the situation that Columbus was born into. And he was a very flamboyant man, tall, red hair, which was and still is considered a Jewish trait. And he had a habit of telling different stories about his life to different people. In fact, we know that his grandfather moved the family from Spain to Italy. So 2 generations back from him, the family moved to Italy, and that's where he was born. That much, we know that for sure about his history. We know that he had a gentleman's education. He could read and write Greek, Latin, and Hebrew. Don't let the Hebrew lead you astray. That was part of a gentleman's education at the time. He also, because he was a seaman, a navigator, a trader, a man of the ships and the ocean all his life, he also spoke several languages, Portuguese, Italian, and Spanish for sure, but he spoke them all poorly with an accent, various accents. And when he wrote notes on anything, there frequently have errors in them, particularly if they're in Spanish or Portuguese. But even his Italian wasn't great. And this language thing is more important than you would think. Frequently when a Jewish family would move, I don't know that his was a Jewish family, but it may have been, would move to leave Spain, to escape Spain, if you will, prior to the Inquisition, which is what his family did. They could take very little, if anything, with them. they always took their language with them. And it was very common for the family to speak Spanish, or in that time, what would have been Ladino, the combination of Hebrew and Spanish that was spoken very widely in Spain at the time. Medieval Spanish, it's sometimes called, and that's accurate too. The families took that with them and they continued. So if you can imagine his family in Italy still speaking Spanish in the house, that would likely be the case if they had been Jewish when they left Spain. We don't know if they were. But the fact that he had trouble with all these languages, it could suggest that he spoke Spanish at home, grew up with Spanish Ladino, and the other languages were all second languages for him. And remember that I said of the Greek, Latin, and the Hebrew that he could read and write them. There wasn't really anyone speaking straight Hebrew at that time that he would have come in contact with. So that's where he was. And interestingly enough, I said when he wrote notes and books or papers, whatever, we don't have too much of that. And the reason we don't have too much of that is because he tasked his two sons with destroying all his papers when he died. He wanted them to destroy his papers and his books, and they did. They didn't get everything, as you would imagine. Nobody could, fortunately. So we have some things left, and we're going to talk about some of those things in a few minutes. But they did destroy an awful lot of it. The very fact that he asked that to be done is suggestive of his wanting to keep a secret. There's just a lot of secret keeping in his life, which raises a bit of a red flag about his personal story. Also, it's interesting to note that the two sons, one is a son he had with his wife, who was a Christian, as he was, and the other was the son that he had with a conversa woman. Now, I'm going to define converso and crypto-Jew for you too, because they're going to come up a lot. A converso, or conversa, she's female. A converso is a Jew who was converted to Christianity during these times, generally by force, or at least coercion, and any descendant of such a person. So this is another story. We're not going to talk about it right now, but obviously around the world, we have a lot of people who are descendants from conversos, therefore are conversos. They do not need to know it. And most probably don't. We're talking about 500 years here. So if you, so this woman was a converso, which means that she had been Jewish at one time and was converted to Christianity. And by the way, that's what the Jewish people call them. The Christians called them new Christians. And they were considered by law to remain new Christians for 3 generations until the blood was purified. And in many, many cases, they were persecuted and prosecuted for many more than 3 generations, particularly if they'd had a rabbi in the family. And a crypto-Jew, very simply, is a converso who knows that they were Jewish and is practicing Judaism in secret, either then or now, and is deliberately presenting themselves as a Christian, practicing Judaism in secret. Lots of reasons for that, which we will also not go into. The reason I mention the mother of his second son being a converso is that by what most Jews, this is changing now, but traditionally Jews considered that if the mother is Jewish, you're Jewish. So whether or not Christopher Columbus was Jewish, one of his sons was, when you look at it that way, because he had a Jewish mother. So let's look at some of the papers and things that didn't get destroyed. And the first thing that is of most importance, we do not have absolute proof that Columbus knew this or had it, but it seems extremely likely for a number of reasons. And I have to go back to 1159 for this. There was a man by the name of Rabbi Benjamin of Tudela. Tudela I think it still exists, a town in Spain. And he undertook to, in 1159, to take a trip around the known world, everything but China, and looking for Jewish communities. It took him approximately 10 years. He went everywhere except China, never got to China. He gave an incredible report. We're talking 12th century. Printing press wasn't even invented yet in Europe. Came back and wrote a book about it. And you also would be able to purchase this book today on Amazon for $10. It still exists after all this time. It wasn't even printed for a couple hundred years after he wrote it. It's called the Itinerary of Benjamin of Tudela. And it's a travel book. It's not Paul Theroux. Don't expect anything like that. It's more like first we went here, then we went here. It took us 5 days to get here. Took us 3 days to get here, but it's fascinating, absolutely fascinating. It also has 3 introductions written by Jewish scholars in 1840, 1907, and 1983, which is even more interesting than the book. But what he did was, he went from community to community, from state to state, from country to country, on land and sea, and he found the Jewish communities. He needed those Jewish communities in any event for himself, to protect him, to feed him, to house him, because he couldn't take 10 years worth of things with him, and to supply money for him. And he came with letters that indicated that he did not owe anybody any money, so that Jewish communities would lend him money. And so he wrote this all down. He returned to Spain with his diary, journal, whatever you want to call it, and it was recorded, and it was widely distributed, extremely popular. And what was the reason for its great popularity? It was one particular community that he wrote about. That it was a community in India. He said they were in India, and he described this Jewish community as being warlike and self-governing. Now, was there a Jewish community in India at this time? Yes, there definitely was. Were they warlike and self-governing? I don't know, but that's how he called it. Now, Jews, and you have to understand that Jews, the typical occupation, a very common occupation for Jews, was navigator, seaman, trader, ship's captain. Jews were very involved with travel on the seas. And so, of course, they were really interested in this group, in this trip. And the reason they were interested, why did I mention the fact that 75% of them disappeared from the Iberian Peninsula between the year 1000 and 1492? Because they were going places. And where were they going? They were looking for places where they could live safely. And this was fantastic, warlike and self-governing. And a lot of the book is fascinating because the Jews in different communities ranged from being very poor to being very rich to being having high government positions in different places. They were in Baghdad. They were all over. He was all over visiting them. So, but this India story was really interesting to the Jewish community. And as I say, the book you can still get it, which is fantastic. If you're interested in Rabbi Benjamin, I recommend it. So did Columbus have this book? Did he read this book? We don't know. If he had it, it's one of the ones his sons got rid of. He may have just read it, but would he have known about it? Absolutely. His friends were all the sailors, the navigators, and they were mostly Jewish. So he was definitely a part of the Jewish community. In fact, two of his closest friends were advisors to Ferdinand and Isabella. In fact, that's the way that he got the money for his trip. He had been turned down in Italy and Portugal, and Ferdinand and Isabella agreed to finance his first trip. But it was largely because if you learned that he went to Isabella and got down on his knees and begged her, that did not really happen. He didn't even meet them before the first trip. He had two friends who were very close advisors to Ferdinand. They were conversos. Ferdinand looked the other way and did not push them into serious Christian behavior because they were very valued advisors, and they were good friends of Columbus. So it was through them that he got permission to sail. And it was a mutual agreement between Ferdinand and Isabella, except for two different reasons. Ferdinand was a businessman. He saw the opportunity of having Columbus get to get to India and bring back spices and silks and whatever that could be traded, and gold. Of course, they had high hopes for him bringing all kinds of riches back. And Isabella wanted to convert the whole world to Christianity and expected Columbus to do that. Now, here's where we get into some of the problems with Columbus that raises our suspicions that he might have had a Jewish background. I will tell you at this point that I think that he was very likely not a practicing Jew, but also very likely aware of his Jewish heritage. It was only his grandfather that moved from Spain. And if they had been Jewish at that time, Columbus would have certainly known that. So what do we see in Columbus's behavior that could lead us to think that he might have been a second generation converso? First of all, the trip. I can't say anything more staggering than about the trip itself. He had 3 ships. I have to say, I know that no matter how filled up your brain is with all kinds of information at this point in your life, that you still know the name of those 3 ships. I won't comment on how that could possibly be, but I know you know them. So 3 ships had 120 people. They had said, now they were at the shore on August 2nd, 1492. The government had said that if you're leaving Spain now by ship, you have to convert first. And so they were converting people at the shore, and lots of the people that got on his ships were being converted. So, which means they were Jewish. The first man to see land was the doctor and the surgeon. Both were. All those 3 of those men were converted at the shore before they could get on the ship. And Columbus had with him a translator. Now this is what we do know, and this is what we can surmise pretty accurately. He had Luis de Torres was the name of the translator. He had him with him on his ship. And by the way, Columbus's journals of those journeys are all available. There's 4 of them, and there is some Hebrew among it because he could read and write in Hebrew. So you can get details of these trips. But he had this translator with him. When he landed, he was in what is now it was Hispaniola then, I think it's Dominican Republic. He took the translator with him. Where did he think he was? Do we know for sure that he thought he was in India? We do. And the reason we know it is, obviously, he called the natives Indians. So he thought he was in India. He brought with him this translator. He and Christopher Columbus and Luis de Torres stepped on land together. And he had a translator with him, and he thought he was in India. And we're pretty sure he knew about Rabbi Benjamin, what language did the translator speak? You're all muted, so you can't answer me, but I know some of you know and some of you don't. The translator spoke Hebrew. He did not bring a translator who could speak any Indian languages. He brought a translator who could speak Hebrew. So I'm saying to you, and of course, their understanding of who was speaking Hebrew and what, and whether it was a living language or a dead language or whatever it was, which varied anyways, was not complete. But I think it's safe to assume that, number one, we have evidence that he thought he was in India. And number two, we have evidence that he at least knew of Rabbi Benjamin's trip, or he would not have brought a Hebrew-speaking translator. So those things we can be sure about. Other indications of a possible Jewish connection. For one thing, when he wrote letters to his sons, he dated them in the Jewish way of dating the letters in those times, which was to date it from the destruction of the temple rather than the birth of Christ. So it would say at the top, en la casa segunda, in the second house, and then it would have the date coming from the destruction of the temple, 73. So that's, other than Jewish people, I don't know of anyone else that did that. He had, as I say, many friends who were in the Jewish community, very much so, and in the seafaring community, which was one and the same for the most part. The quadrant, for instance, was invented by a Jewish man. It was even called the Quadrant Judaicus for many years. Abraham Crescus and his son invented that the quadrant, that piece of equipment that was very important. And so it was very common. It was very understandable. Now, the notes in books that we have of his, we do have some of his books. We do have some letters and things, but we have books where he wrote in the margins. And he took notes and he wrote them in Spanish. And they were filled with grammatical errors. And this was a highly educated man. He had a gentleman's education. So, but when he used the vernacular, he was not so good at that. So we assume from that he did not know Spanish well. And we also have contemporary reports that he spoke with an accent and with no matter which language he used. So that goes back to the idea that they probably spoke Spanish at home, or Ladino. It would have been Ladino at that time. And because that was really the Spanish of Spain in the Middle Ages. So another thing, those 3 ships with 120 men, they did not have a single priest on board. Now, not only for the sake of the 120 men, but for all these native people they were going to convert to Christianity. I would bet money that Queen Isabella did not know there were no priests on that ship, on those ships. But so did Columbus have a serious intention to convert the natives to Christianity? He couldn't possibly have. And the easiest people to get on board were Christians. In fact, if Jews wanted to go, they had to convert. So surely he could have found a priest or two. But there's no indication. I've never found any indication of why he didn't, if he ever said a reason of it. I don't know. So that also is very odd. The sons, what I want to do is quote for you. I think you will find this interesting. Not the sons, the son, Fernando. He wrote a book about Columbus, and I'm going to tell you a couple of books too in a minute that I recommend. that you might want to look at if you want to know more about this. And I'd just say, just as an aside, that the only reason that I even got started with researching Columbus is because when I was giving lectures at what was then Elder Hostel and is now is Rhodes Scholar, about the crypto-Jewish history of the American Southwest, every single time somebody would come up to me, maybe several people, and ask me, was Columbus Jewish? So I finally thought, I had no idea. I thought, well, I'm just going to find out. Well, it turned out it's not that easy to find out, but I did try. So I want to quote two things. His son, Fernando, who is the son of the Converso woman, wrote a book about him, which has, his name is Fernando Colon, and that book was reprinted by Rutgers University Press in 1959. And the name of it is The Life of Admiral Christopher Columbus by his son, Fernando. And it's translated by Benjamin Keene and published in 1959 by Rutgers University Press. He has many things that are interesting, but I'll give you two examples. This is a direct quote from something his father reported on September 23rd. Now, do you still remember when, this you might not remember so well because we changed the date that we celebrate Columbus Day. It's all over the place now, but I think it was October 12th that he sighted land. And this is what Columbus wrote. So this high sea was very necessary to me, for this had not happened except at the time of the Jews when they went out of Egypt with Moses, who was leading them out of captivity. Now, his son Fernando said it was very typical of his father to compare himself to Jewish leaders like Moses. So he was obviously familiar with Jewish history, and he had a very grandiose idea of himself. He was called the Admiral of the Ocean Seas, and he loved that. He I'm sure had a huge ego. He got himself in trouble. We can talk about that for 1 minute too, before his 4 trips were over. But another thing that he wrote, and this one's even better. This is a quote: I am not the first admiral of my family. He's referring to that Admiral of the Ocean Seas title. I am not the first admiral of my family. Let them give me that name if they will. For after all, David, a very wise king, and was later made a king of Jerusalem, and I am the servant of that same Lord who raised David to that state. Now that's pretty telling. So we've got a certain amount of circumstantial evidence. That's what I would call it. The question has been raised: what about DNA? Can we find out anything from his DNA? Well, here we go again. There's 3 different places that claim him. And it's entirely possible that parts of him are in all 3 places because it was common in those days to take it was done a lot with saints where they took a finger or something as a relic. And they could have done this with him. We really don't know, but he's supposed to be on the island. He's supposed to be in Italy. He's supposed to be in Spain, and we wouldn't have any way of knowing anymore. He has no direct descendants, despite the Jewish son. He has no direct descendants. So I once watched a program on the History Channel. Maybe some of you saw it. It was a few years ago about Columbus, and it was a 1-hour tease. I'm not kidding. The only reason I watched it because everybody was always asking me if he was Jewish, and this was sort of at the beginning of my research. And they had a lot of good information and accurate information, but before every commercial, they suggested that after the commercial, that you would get the answer to this question. They never had the answer. And so I wasn't shocked, but I was amazed that they could carry off that deception for an hour, but they did. So let me just suggest a couple books for you, and then I think that we can take questions. And some of you may have already put some questions in the chat, but we'll look at that. So I suggest Ferdinand Colon's book, and that's 1959. I also suggest Jane Gerber has some of this in The Jews of Spain, and that's 1992. A very good book is a book called Christopher Columbus and the Participation of the Jews in the Spanish and Portuguese Discoveries. It's written by Meyer Keyserling, Keyserling. And it was translated by an Albuquerque man named Hubert Allen in 1989, and he published it. So it's an old book, but republished. Salvador de Madariaga wrote a book called Christopher Columbus Being the Life of the Very Magnificent Lord Don Cristobal Colon, published by Macmillan in 1940. It's an old book. It's really good, though. I know interlibrary loans are not working so well these days, but you can make a note of it. And last but not least, Simon Wiesenthal, who definitely believed that his book is called Sails of Hope, The Secret Mission of Christopher Columbus, published by Macmillan in 1972. He believed that Columbus was on a search for a safe place for the Jews to go. That may be true. Wouldn't surprise me a bit, but that doesn't prove he was Jewish. It may have been a way that he could get his friends Sanchez and Santangelo, who were the advisors to Ferdinand, a way that he could get them to speak in his behalf. So I wouldn't take that as meaning that he was Jewish necessarily, proving it. But he was very much a part of the Jewish community. And that he would have used that, he was smart to use that as a way to get the money for the trip. One more thing I'll say, should we care? Should we care anymore? He has fallen so out of favor. And even at the time, he wound up in jail for 6 weeks. He mistreated, I mean, everything that is now coming out about him is true. He mistreated the native people. He brought them back as slaves. He did all kinds of things that were really bad. Should we care? I'll take your opinions. I can give you a short answer. There's 2 ways to look at it. On one hand, I think we should still care. I think it's really interesting. It's a really interesting point of history, of Jewish history. How big of a part is he of Jewish history? And there's so much more than what I'm able to present here. The second one, maybe not. Maybe is this good for the Jews or bad for the Jews? I don't think it's really now at this point very good for us to be parading him around. Here in New Mexico, we don't really celebrate Columbus Day for a lot of very obvious reasons, but I see that this is becoming a thing in other parts of the country, and it's totally understandable. So yes, it's interesting, but certainly with a grain of salt. He wasn't a hero. He was an interesting man, but he wasn't a hero. So I think, Marcia, it looks like you might have some questions.
So one question is, if Columbus was not Jewish, what theories exist for his secrecy?
Okay, so that's a good question. I haven't encountered any explanation of his secrecy. The only thing that I have seen that could be part of it is just that he seemed to be, his contemporaries describe him as a man, a lot of a braggart, a big ego. He liked to tell one story about himself with one group, and he'd tell a different story about himself with another group. And so maybe even to call it, I mean, maybe that was secrecy, maybe that was a way of hiding his real roots, or maybe it was just a way of getting attention. Because there's an awful lot of talk about what a big ego he had, and he was so flamboyant. And you can just imagine the attention he got of a man more than 6 feet tall in those times with flaming red hair, and sure he had some kind of uniform on or whatever. And just the idea that he was the Admiral when he wasn't an admiral. But so I don't know. I've never had read anything that says anything other than that for an explanation.
So we have a couple other questions. One was why did Columbus take slaves? Do you know?
Why did he take slaves? He was a businessman as well. He took slaves for first of all, he took 4 trips altogether, and they wanted gold, and they wanted slaves back, and he didn't find, well, you know, he found some stuff, but they didn't find what they expected to find. They weren't in India either. So they weren't even in the United States. They were on an island off of the, you know, off the coast. So this was the kind of bounty that he was expected to bring back. It wasn't the only thing, but it was bounty. It was wealth. And he had no scruples about doing it.
So you had said that Columbus has no descendants, but whatever happened to his son? And couldn't there have been DNA testing of descendants of his son?
Well, as far as we know, there are no direct descendants from either of those sons. We don't, so we don't know. If there are any, speak up, because but we'd still have the problem on the other side of finding the remains that we're sure are his.
Folks, don't forget, if you have questions, there's a chat window at the bottom, and just at the very bottom of that, you can type in your message. And if you do that, we'll know what your questions are. So we have a couple of comments. So this is just a comment saying, this is from saying that she has she's mentioned the theory that Columbus was Jewish to some colleagues, including professional historians, and they've always been outraged by the idea and dismissed it out of hand. So, interesting.
Well, and what outraged her with these people? What reason were they outraged?
This is Alma Gottlieb. Alma, if you want to mute yourself, and do you have anything else to add? Alma?
Yes, hi there. Thank you for asking. Well, that's got a long answer, but I would say anti-Semitism is alive and well in Portugal, and the Inquisition casts a long shadow and is no longer gone.
So these people were in Portugal.
These are Portuguese colleagues. That's where I mentioned. That was the context of my comment. That in Portugal, I've mentioned this to colleagues who are quite familiar with the period. And
so what they're saying is, we love Columbus and we don't want him to be Jewish.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
That's right.
Okay. And I think, you know, that's turning so much now that, you know, we probably don't want him to be Jewish for.
Now that people increasingly don't like Columbus, maybe the Portuguese will be happy to cede him to Jews, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So another comment was that there was no priest on board. And did that fact come out of your own research, or was that something that someone else had
you know, if I am not mistaken, I think that is in Simon Wiesenthal's book. I'm pretty sure that's where it is. That was his book, The Sails of Hope, The Secret Mission of Christopher Columbus, which is totally biased towards the idea that he was looking for a place for the Jews to go. But nonetheless, it has information that I found in other books as well. Corroborated is the word I'm looking for. So I'm pretty sure that's where I first saw it. That's a very good book, but you have to keep in mind that he has a bias from the beginning. It's in the title. But he did his research. So that is I'm pretty sure where I saw it, and I may have seen it in other places too. I did, you know, I'm mentioning some books for you all if you want to read, but there's tons of articles that you can find, and more current than some of these dates. These are all older books, but they're good research. And there's been a lot of research on Columbus that sort of touches on whether or not he might have been Jewish. That isn't the main point of what they're doing, but you can extrapolate a lot from some of the other things. But I have to say, you know, again, I'm just telling you my opinion. I don't know, neither does anyone else.
Do you know, or do we know where his remains are?
No, we don't. We have 3 places, and I can tell you I think I can tell you in a minute where they were. Well, maybe not, but they are, one is in Spain, one is in Italy, and one is on the islands. Okay, the Seville Cathedral in Spain, the Columbus Lighthouse in Santo Domingo, and then I don't have the name of the location in Italy, but that's the 3rd place.
Thank you.
If you want to go look, we won't see anything.
Many places to go find his remains. So you had mentioned, is there a list of the names of the people that were on the 1492 ships, and has there been any research of those passengers?
I don't know if the list is complete, but yes, if you go to the Smithsonian Institution, published all 4 of his journals. And I think they did it on the anniversary. I think they did it in 1992. And they were available in paperback. I had them and I read them. I don't think I have many more, but I'm sure they're available. And I believe they're called the Journals of Christopher Columbus. And you can find lots of it. Now, this is what he wrote. Remember, he told different stories to different people. He isn't exactly a completely reliable narrator, if you will, but you know, so if something doesn't jive with other things, then it may be that he's not. I mean, you heard these 2 quotes. You can see the kind of braggadocio he used in writing, but it's still very interesting, and you can confirm a lot of these things by checking what other historians have written about, him.
So we also had a question about whether the slaves that he took were from the Dominican Republic. The commenter said that she heard that all the native Indians were exterminated.
Yeah, well, okay, no, they were from it wasn't the Dominican Republic then, it was Hispaniola. And as far as I know, that's the only place. I don't believe he ever got onto the mainland. But all the native people were exterminated by him. Is that what she means? I don't.
No, it's not clear.
Yeah, I don't think that's true, but a lot of them died.
Can I comment on that? Because
Donna?
Yeah, Donna, I was in the Dominican Republic. I was there teaching music students, and the people that took me to the museums and to this museum that you're talking about, my Columbus, they told me the story that the reason there are no more Indians there is because they were exterminated, but they didn't tell me how they were exterminated.
Well, that may be, I don't know, exterminated, if that's the right word. I don't think that was his intention. We know that Native people died, but from diseases that they brought, and he used them as slaves even there, you know, and mistreated them. But I'm a little cautious about the word exterminated, and I'm not an expert. If you're curious, you might search that down. But it was certainly not a deliberate intent on his part. He wanted them to work for him there. He wanted to bring them back to Spain. So certainly those weren't, although they may have died en route and also when they got to Spain. But so they may be all gone. I'm just a little bit from that original population. I'm not even sure about that, but even if they are, I would use a different word, because it just sounds, I don't know, it just sounds planned, and I don't think it was planned.
So this is a question about the dating that he uses from the dating letters from the destruction of the temple. Is there any other reason why he might have dated from the destruction of the temple, other than the fact that he might have been Jewish?
That's a good question. I can't think of any other reason. I mean, there was no cachet to doing anything Jewish in Spain in 1492. So why someone would have affected something like that? And also, he only did that on letters to his sons. He didn't do it remember that. I said it, but remember, I said a lot of things. He didn't do it publicly, you know, to other venues or outlets or anything like that. So, and it's also interesting that to me, and maybe I don't know much about it, but right before the date, he wrote en la casa segunda, in the second house, meaning the second, the rebuilding of the temple, I guess is what he means. So, and if he sent letters like that to his sons, that also suggested he expected them to understand what that meant. And one of them, you know, so, you know, I even wonder about the first wife. Presumably she was Christian, but what does that mean in 1492? A lot of people were Christian and they weren't. So, but that's just me talking. I don't have any proof of anything about the first wife. The second wife was a converso.
We also have a question about whether the records of those who became conversos before boarding the ships, would those records remain in Spanish archives? In
Yes.
Spanish archives. Okay.
Yes. The Inquisition records exist. They are available. They're in Spanish. They're available, and that is why you know, now Spain, Portugal have offered citizenship to Christians who can prove that they are descendants of Spanish citizens who were expelled in the Inquisition, and that's why they're able to prove it. They can go all the way back through inquisitional records and find it. There are also the church kept records too, and records were kept of name changes. Many people, most people, when they converted, so-called, to Christianity, took what was considered a Christian name. And many of the names that we see, especially in the Southwest, that are common Hispanic names, Spanish names, come from that, and they are traceable back, that people can trace their families back and even find out when the name was changed. And compare that to when that person was converted, because the church kept the conversion records too. And that is something that, if I may say, Ashkenazi Jews sometimes they're a little credulous about that, because Ashkenazi Jews cannot really frequently trace their families back 500 years because of all the things that were destroyed during World War II. But if you are a Spanish Jew and you came through from Spain through Mexico into southern, southwestern United States area, there's records. There are records, and so it's very traceable.
Norma, thank you so much. I'm going to turn this back over to Linda to wrap things up. And there's maybe a couple more questions. I don't think we're going to get to them, but thank you. And Linda, take it over.
Thank you.
Okay, could I say one thing? If anybody has a question that they still want answered, you can go to my website, and you can, there's a way to get to my email from that, and my website is just normalibman.com. And so I'd be happy to answer any questions if you write to me, www.normalibman.com.
Marcia, can I make a quick comment?
Of course.
There is a book that I read a number of years ago, and the title, I think, is called 1493, The New World After Columbus.
Yes.
And one of the things that was so startling about that was the description of how the early explorers saw, you know, big settlements all throughout the Americas. And then after the settlers came, you know, 90% of the native population of North America and other places disappeared.
Yes, it's an excellent book. The man's name is Charles Mann, I think. I'm sure about the man part, M-A-N-N. I think it's Charles Mann. And he also wrote a book called 1491, which tells what this part of the world was like before So they're both good. They're both very good.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Norma, again, thanks so much for taking your time to prepare today's program. I'm sure everyone enjoyed it. We did, certainly. And as Norma said, we couldn't get to everyone's question or comment, but you know how to reach her for further conversation. So on behalf of the New Mexico Jewish Historical Society, we thank you. And for those of you who participated in one of our programs for the first time, check us out. And we'd love to have you participate in future programs. Marcia, thank you for your help in setting it up. She's our tech wizard.
And thanks, Linda and Marcia, for being the hosts.
Yeah, we've enjoyed it. And again, everyone stay healthy and safe, and hope to see you sometime soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank